What's up, model makers? Have you ever heard of one of those things that just makes you go, what? Why would anybody even try that? Here's a good example. Once, many years ago, back in my young engineering days, I was in Singapore and I was having lunch with my Chinese colleagues. And they asked me if I wanted to try something called a century egg. And I said to myself, no, that sounds very sketchy, but I didn't want to be rude. So, of course, with my outside voice, I said, sure, why not? So they bring this thing, and it's basically a chicken egg that was, it was like a hard-boiled egg, except that it was black, and it had this kind of translucent, gelatinous appearance to it, and was easily one of the most unappetizing things I've ever seen in my entire life. But that was nothing compared to the stench. You know how if you have cats and you've been away for like 2 weeks on vacation and you come home and the cat box just reeks of cat piss? That's what this thing smelled like. And it tasted even worse. When you bit into it, it just flooded your nostrils and your taste buds with ammonia. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this thing smells like it's been soaking in piss for a century. And, what Chinese guy is walking across the farmyard, sees a chicken egg soaking in a puddle of horse piss, and thinks, now there's a snack I'd like to try. I mean, right? You're with me, right? This just seems entirely implausible. Well, it happens in model making too. And here's one there's a few that I've run across. One of them is using Future as a decal setting agent. Why would you do that? Future is an acrylic varnish. Why would it ever have any effect on decals? And there's lots of them, but one in particular that I've heard about a lot recently, and that I've heard guys just swear up and down works really good, is using paint thinner, and it can be either acrylic thinner or mineral spirits paint thinner, as a pigment fixer. Okay, are you with me? You're brushing pigment on your model airplane to simulate an exhaust stain or a powder burn, or you're piling some pigment on the side of your Sherman tank to simulate a pile of dirt or mud or whatever, or maybe you're working on a diorama base and you need to add some dirt to it, and you need a pigment fixer. Now, in my mind, I can't imagine why it would ever occur to anybody to use paint thinner of any kind, because there's nothing in there that should glue all those little tiny particles of pigment to each other, much less to the surface that they're applied to. So the logic of that just doesn't really make much sense to me, unless maybe the thinner is acting on the surface of the paint that the pigment is on, just enough to soften it and make it sticky enough that those little particles of pigment will cling to it. But that doesn't really address the particles sticking to each other. So anyway, I don't know why this should work. Can't even imagine it. But as I like to say, my favorite expression is from the old engineer who told me once that one good test is worth 1,000 expert opinions. So let's just test it. I've got a few products sitting right here on the bench, including one that one of my friends just told me about, which he says works great as a pigment fixer. And we're going to try them all out, and we're going to see what actually happens. All right, let's do this. Okay, we are all set up to do some science. As you can see, I've laid out my 4 test subjects here. I've got some Future and some water, and I've already mixed some 50-50 in this little cup right here that I just sloshed out. Good thing I didn't slosh it out on my phone. Then I've got some plain old mineral spirits right here. Over here, I've got some acrylic thinner. Now, this is just the regular old UMP airbrush thinner. It's an alcohol blend. I don't know exactly what's in it, but it works good. I've used it with all sorts of acrylic paints, and it works fine. I even use it to thin inks when I want to do an ink wash. And then finally here, I've got some of Meg Jimenez's pigment fixer, which I am 100% certain is just basically mineral spirits with a little bit of binder in it, or you could think of it as just very thin paint, a very thin enamel paint without any pigment. So we've got that, and we've got a little bit of ammo airfield dust pigment. And what we're going to do is on my trusty Revell F22 paint mule, you can see I've laid out some areas here where we're going to test. And I've labeled those. Let's just go ahead and zoom in here. So we've got an area for future, for thinner, for mineral spirit, and for pigment fixer. So what I'm going to do then is, first of all, I'm going to just I'm going to test in two different ways. One is with the pigment just brushed on in a thin layer. So I'm doing that here. And this is what you might do if you were just, I don't know, creating an exhaust stain or a powder burn or just a light layer of dust. So I'm just putting it on there and smearing it around and doing basically what I would do for that type of effect. And sometimes I even will rub them in really good with a Q-tip, just to make sure that it's really ground into the surface of the paint as much as possible. So I'm doing that. And one reason that I want to test this is because I've found that for this type of pigment application, that no fixer of any kind has been the best thing for me. When I'm at the point where I'm doing this, I'm generally at the very end, and I'm not going to be touching the thing anymore, and so I don't care too much about things like fingerprints or whatever. And I've found that any sort of fixer tends to make a really thin application of pigment just disappear. So hold on. Okay, so now what we've got there, you can see, is just a very thin dust layer of pigment. Now, for the other part of the test, what I want to do is make some little piles of pigment, like you might do if you were creating a, I don't know, not necessarily a mud effect, but a pile of dirt effect, for lack of any better thing to call it. Uncover the letters there so we don't lose track of our experimental process. And I'm dropping piles of pigment all over the place, but hey, it's all in the name of science, right? Okay, so there we go. We've got the pigments applied, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a small brush to apply the fixer of choice in each situation, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit so that you can see hopefully what's going on here. I want to get close, but still where you can see what I'm using. So I'm just randomly going to start with the thinner. Okay, this is the UMP thinner, and I'm going to just put some in my brush and just apply it to the area here where I've got this dusty layer of pigment. Okay, there's some there. Now I'm going to go for over here where I've got this pile of pigment and see what we can do there. What I find when I do this is that I get a lot stuck to the brush, and that kind of screws up the look that I'm after, because I don't really want to disturb my carefully crafted little pile there. You guys saw how carefully I arranged that dirt. So let's take an eyedropper, and I've got some thinner in there, and I'm going to just very carefully but this is difficult to do. I mean, it wants to just basically wash away all of my pigment, but it is what it is. I don't really know any other way to put it on there. Okay, now, since I've got the eyedropper in hand, let's do the same thing with some mineral spirits. Kind of rinse the eyedropper out a little bit there, and I'm going to just come along here and apply. Now, one thing that you should be able to see, I don't know if you'll be able to from that far away, is look at the way the mineral spirits immediately just starts wicking its way into that little pile of dirt. All I did was put a drop of it over here, and it's now worked its way almost all the way across, as opposed to the acrylic thinners, which basically just kind of floods the area and does nothing. I'd put like 5 or 6 drops of it, and I've only put a drop or 2 of mineral spirits. So let's add a little bit more and get all of that thoroughly wetted. Okay, so that's got that. Now, I'm going to take that now, and since I've got a little bit of mineral spirits already in the dropper, I'm going to come over here and get some pigment fixer, and we're going to put that right here. Let's see how that works. And again, notice because of the mineral spirits carrier, how I can put the drop just kind of on the edge of my pile of dirt there, and it just wicks its way all the way in there, and I don't really have to use very much of it. You know, and if you're patient and you just kind of watch, you can see that it'll keep working its way in there, and you don't have to keep adding more and more. So that's pigment fixer. Okay, now, okay, I just screwed up and you guys saw me do it. I squirted the leftover pigment fixer into my little container of acrylic thinner. The good news is I don't need the acrylic thinner anymore because I've already done both of the areas that I wanted to. So I got a new dropper, and now I'm going to get some of this mixture of Future and water, and we're going to apply it over here to this section. You can see it just kind of sits there. It doesn't flow. So we'll just keep kind of working it there. It's just that surface tension is a killer. So it's beaded up there, and I'm going to work it into my little puddle of, well, all right, fine. We'll just mix it up because it's clearly not gonna do what I want it to do, which is soak into the pigment and preserve the like I said the carefully arranged shape of my pigment. But now I need to go back over to this other section and apply the other materials there. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to get a little bit of, well, let's see, I think I'll do the pigment. I think I'll do the mineral spirits first. I've got some of that on my brush now. Okay, mineral spirits. And we'll put that on right here. And you can see that just like in the other situation, it wicks all over the place, which is good. and I don't have to really touch very heavily to get it to work. Okay, now kind of clean that off, and we'll come over here and get some pigment fixer, and almost touch the wrong area, and we'll do the same thing with it. Get this whole area right here, and that looks pretty good. Okay, and then the last spot is the future and water mix, and I'm just going to take some of that on my brush, which I cleaned out so it doesn't have any more pigment fixer in it, and we're just going to apply that here. Now you can see again it just wants to beat up. There's just too much surface tension, so I don't know, maybe the trick is to thin it with something besides water. I don't know, but that doesn't wick around the way that I'd like for it to for this purpose. So, at any rate, one thing to note, a couple of things actually, before I go away and let this dry, is let's take a look at the time. So it's, there we go, it's 3:41 on Monday the 15th. So I'm only going to have to let this dry for about an hour, but you can see, if you look close, let's zoom in here. Let me adjust the camera angle a little bit better. Whoops, lousy camera operator. You can see that this area where I applied the acrylic thinner, which is basically just alcohol, is already almost dry. You can see that that's, you know, just within the few minutes that I've been working here, it's gone off all by itself. Then you can see that where I've got the thicker piles of pigment, how different each of those sections look. And I'm gonna see if I can get us a real close look here. Okay, so you can see very different between the mineral spirits based products. They look very dark and muddy right now. And then you've got the alcohol based product and the water and future mix, which is just kind of sludge. And then we get a close look at these areas where I just brushed it on to the thin layer of pigment. So we can see what those look like right now, and we'll come back in an hour or maybe two, whatever it takes, and we'll see how well those piles of pigment are stuck down there. Oh, before I forget, I just want to note that the paint that's on here is Model Master Zinc Chromate Green Acryl. So it's an acrylic paint. It was thinned in an experiment that I did with Mr. Color Leveling Thinner, which is a lacquer thinner, but that shouldn't matter. Point is, it's an acrylic paint that's on this surface that we're working with here. Okay, here we are, back again with the pigment fixing mad science experiment, and it's the next morning. You can see that it's now 10:27 on February 16th. The truth is that I just didn't have time to get back to this last night, which was fine because they took a little longer to dry than I expected, and I wanted to make sure that everything was 100% good before I tried to make some conclusions. So here we go. What I'm going to do now is we're going to zoom in and have a good close look at these results, and let's start with the big piles of pigment first. Okay, now what I'm going to do first is just hit them a little bit with a brush and see how well they're stuck down. This is the little extra pigment that I spilled right there, and it's, you know, dry. Never had any fixer of any kind put on it, so you can see how easily that brushes off and what's left over. Okay, So first of all, let's just start up here with this stuff that I fixed with the 50-50 wash of Future and water. Now, that, as I expected, is impenetrable. It's like concrete. So, if that's the effect you're after, then I suppose that works pretty good. It's actually not shiny, which I expected it to be, given that there's Future in there. So, that's an interesting result. Okay, now let's move over here to the part that was fixed with nothing but alcohol-based acrylic thinner and see how that does. Uh-oh. Not looking too sturdy. It's not all coming off, but certainly a good bit of it came off. So you can see there, mostly that did not hold, which was pretty much what I expected. Okay, now let's go for the part that was fixed with just plain mineral spirits. Oh, it's just flying off of there. Again, as I expected, and it's holding even less well than what I fixed with the alcohol thinner. Okay, now last one is where I fixed it with pigment fixer, and as expected, it's 100% sturdy, and it still has most of its normal shape that it did. It still looks like, mostly like the pile of dirt that was there to start with, and no amount of brushing on it is really going to do much to it. So let's ramp up the severity of the test a little bit. I'm going to rub on it with my finger, and let's see what happens. Okay, the Future, again, it ain't going anywhere. Even when I scratch it with my fingernail, it's hard for it to come off. It does, but not easily. Okay, now let's go for what's fixed with the acrylic thinners. Okay, now there you go. Some of it is staying. I'm honestly surprised that even that much of it is. But there you go. That's what you're left with, and even a little bit of fingernail action makes that get pretty loose. So, okay, now where I fixed it with mineral spirits, pretty much nothing left. Getting after this part that was done with pigment fixer, and it's just like a scab. Hopefully you don't ever have a scab like that. If you do, you better see a doctor. But it's not going anywhere. Done deal. Okay, now let's just go straight to the fingertip test on these areas where I did a thin layer of fixer. And before I do that, though, you can see what I was talking about regarding the way that the fixer affects the appearance. Obviously, the one that was fixed with the Future mix is affected the most. The one that was fixed with the acrylic alcohol thinner looks the most natural, appears virtually unchanged from when it was applied, and then you can see that there's a slight difference between fixing with mineral spirits or with a mineral spirits based fixer. So what happens when we rub on these? The Future, actually, that changed it for the better. Looks pretty good. Okay, now the mineral spirits one. Okay, it's just mostly gone. I mean, there's still a slight discoloration there, but for the most part, it's gone. Okay, now pigment fixer doesn't really change much, as I would expect. It's there. It's a done deal. Okay, now the alcohol thinner. Also mostly gone. There's some left in those deep recesses, but for the most part, it's just gone. So there you have it. There is the result of some pigment fixing mad science. There you have it. One more episode of model making myth busting in the books. Personally, I think after doing this little exercise, that the evidence is pretty conclusive. Obviously, it all depends on what your personal process is, and if whatever you're doing works, then you should keep doing it. But based on what I've seen here, I have no reason to believe that paint thinner is a good pigment fixer, and that it makes any sense to try to use it for that. I was a little surprised by the combination of Future and Water. It honestly did a little bit better than I expected it to. But again, I think I'm going to stick with a proper pigment fixer. I find with most things in life that the results are better when you use a tool that's designed for the job at hand. So, but again, everybody's process is different. So, if what you're doing works, then keep doing it. If you're trying to decide what to use as a pigment fixer, then I'd say get you some of that ammo pigment fixer because it is magic juice as far as I'm concerned. Okay, guys, if you've stayed with me this long, as always, I appreciate it. Much love.